Welcome to Horticulture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture. It's a rainy day here in the bluegrass. I got my little cup of tea, feeling all cozy today. How about you guys?
Oh, got some decaf, and I don't know where I went wrong in my life. I'm drinking decaf.
Need some caffeine, and I was surprised that it actually thundered this morning.
It lightning.
Yeah.
Too. I was
it was a big
we're
splash,
doing this.
And I mean, it's bad when your Christmas lights get turned off because of the extremely bright lightning.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, I know.
That is
so dark outside.
Because it was very dark even at the the day that we're recording this on here in December.
7:30. It was so dark.
Even at 9:30 at my office, it was like the lights were still on, the outside lights were still on because it was so very dark and foreboding even. So, yeah. I should have had caffeine. I was over 400 milligrams of caffeine, so I need to stop.
I feel kind of grumpy today.
Grumpy?
So grumpy Gil.
If you were a Smurf or maybe a dwarf in the Disney classic, which would you be?
Well, I would definitely be blue.
Well,
that doesn't really narrow it down,
Village.
I guess.
I feel like Brett would be Doc. That would be mine.
Oh yeah.
That's
fitting.
He was kind of.
My grandma used to call me Snow White. I don't know why.
No.
I think that she just had so many grandkids, I couldn't remember their names, and so she would just make up Disney characters.
After saying I would be Doc, now I'm feeling bashful.
Oh.
No, the weather, I don't know. Maybe I'm going to blame it on the weather. But,
good excuse.
You know, in Harry Potter and in real life, one of the things you can do to turn the frown upside down is to eat some chocolate. I have a question for you all to kick us off today.
Let's go.
Not related to that. That was just a fact that I...
I was like,
man.
Chocolate? I just ate a chocolate cookie.
If you had to rank dark chocolate, milk chocolate, white chocolate, in order of your preference, 1, 2, 3, what would the order be?
That order.
I was like, we're count. I know that's exact that order. Dark chocolate, milk chocolate.
Dark chocolate
white chocolate
is number one.
Chocolate, right? I mean,
dark chocolate. White chocolate would be my least favorite, probably. It would be lowest on my list.
Dark chocolate's number one.
Dark chocolate for me. And, as I've gotten older, I eat like this. My favorite chocolate is actually like the semi-sweet baking chocolate. I don't know, because it's not as sweet.
Oh my God. You all are, this is a,
we're disappointing.
Tell us, Brett, what are you going to tell us about white chocolate?
He's got something in his pocket.
Honestly a little surprised.
We're going to have to add video to this podcast.
This feels
like a good debate.
This feels very millennial food preference to me, if I'm just being honest.
What? Gen Z over here.
Yeah, it feels
very
like as if milk chocolate isn't the chocolate that built America,
built cities,
and it's
built mediocrity.
Hershey, Pennsylvania.
I think there's been some milk chocolate erasure, and I'm not surprised by the answer that I'm getting here today. I'm a little surprised that Ray did not rep milk chocolate more than
I used to be, Brett. I used to be team milk chocolate, but I don't know. I like my wines a bit drier and my chocolate a little less sweet nowadays. I don't know what it is, Brett.
I guess it depends on the kind of milk chocolate you're getting. Right, you got to think about that.
The quality does vary quite a bit.
That I would gotten prefer a bad rap a little bit, because it's like made, and it's like if you get really cheap candy or whatever, that's just like not high quality,
waxy.
It's waxy, and so like I feel like
in their Halloween.
You get that less with dark chocolate. So, but I don't know. My mom always had dark chocolate at the house.
I love dark chocolate. The heavy cocoa or whatever, that's in there.
So within the dark chocolate realm, how dark are you choosing to go? Like, is it?
I don't know. It's kind of like my soul, all the way dark. I mean, pretty dark.
So I'm
60%.
What's that?
65% is
60
about
to
as,
70.
anything more than that, the bitterness.
But like
It gets
60
too-
is
yeah.
usually.
It gets too bitter.
So you all are okay. All right.
I feel so judged.
Well,
We
tell
feel like,
us,
Alexis, it's like
Brett.
we're not committed enough on our percent.
Well, I know. I
89%.
expected the man who drinks like black coffee to be all about the dark chocolate, so I'm just like a little surprised.
No, I enjoy dark chocolate. We buy mostly dark chocolate in our
So do
house, and so I'm as disappointed with myself as I am with any of you. I was just hoping that it wasn't as homogenous as it is, because I think that it's, I don't know. I mean, I'm not an advocate here for white chocolate. Like, I think it's actually should not even be considered chocolate. It's its own standalone thing that has value.
It's a candy. Yeah.
But yeah, I've just been appreciating milk chocolate again over the last couple of years, and wanted to open it up. But
I recently had some brought to me that was from Switzerland, and it was amazing, and it was milk chocolate, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't taste like, as we've already discussed, like the normal milk chocolate that we think about. So I think it really depends on what brand, who's making it, all that kind of thing.
One time when I was little, I was at my grandparents' for Easter, and I was probably like one of the youngest kids there, and my mom's from Pittsburgh, right? And so there's really good like candy places, and there was like this little candy shop that made like homemade chocolate bunnies, and they were like the solid ones, not the hollow ones or whatever. Well, I was probably maybe like 6 or 7, and I ate my entire Easter basket, which included 2 like solid milk chocolate bunnies,
bricks
and
of
I
chocolate.
threw up.
Because you were so happy about your achievement, you were just so excited that you.
Yeah, I was so excited that I threw up. That's the only time. But man, that was good chocolate, because it was like made up the street, and they poured their own chocolate bars and stuff. And I remember my mom being like, "Oh, well, this is a good chocolate," and then I proceeded to eat it all.
Alexis ate it all.
Well, so if I were trying to provide some sustenance and treats to horticulture hosts through the wintertime, I would offer them dark chocolate. It sounds like maybe put it on a stick, put it in a small dispenser outside, so that you could come up and access it at any point.
Yes.
Let's just say hypothetically, I had some other friends, across species friends, like birds,
that also liked feeders,
that also like to eat things, but maybe didn't have such a preference for dark chocolate. Maybe we can talk a little bit about,
Brett. We could do chocolate instead of suet.
I don't want to get into litigation, Ray.
Okay.
Okay.
We don't want to go there. We don't want to confuse our listeners.
I think we can work out. Yeah. So what are we talking about today?
Talking about some birds, which is not the normal thing we might talk about here on horticulture, but it is winter, and for a lot of us, we don't have a lot of plants in our lives right now, and so it can be nice to do something for our other garden friends,
our
feathered friends,
wildlife that we have.
Yeah. Jessica and I were talking about how, as millennials, we are probably not great. We're not great millennials because we're not huge birders, but
that's a thing now for millennials, is like you're supposed to hit a certain age, and then you're suddenly going to be like, oh my gosh, there's birds all around us.
Civil War history, or it's birds, or it's barbecue. I mean,
I think it's because we're like really into plants. I think we fell too hard on the
really into plants.
Okay, gotcha.
We're outside all the time, so like we already notice birds, but maybe we just don't know all their names.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
I also think here's a hot take. I think that a lot of people are into it at a level of casualness where their knowledge is probably similar to what you have, but they talk about it as if they're really, really into it. And the people on this group are like, if they're into something, they're very into it.
You're like
a little bit
into it all the way, kind of like good chocolate.
I would don't. My point here just mainly just don't feel bad. You probably are into birds as much as many of your cohort. It's just that
birds and gardening go together.
You are into like rock or what is it called? Dish gardens.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure. All the succulents.
So cut yourself some
fair
slack.
point.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Brett. I appreciate that you're recovering us into the millennial generation.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, of course.
It is important.
You love dark chocolate, so you're clearly part of that. Did you all get into any of the bird anything during COVID at all?
The bird apps we had after COVID. I think it's post COVID. We had like
chicken
actually a
wings
horticulture meeting, but yeah, it's there's an app that would listen to bird calls and identify birds, and then we had a program on that from a naturalist in the eastern part of the
Is this
state here in
Merlin
Kentucky.
Bird ID?
Yeah, that's one we have.
That was one of the ones that she discussed, but that got me, that kind of reignited my interest in birds because now it's easier than ever. I mean, I don't have big binoculars on me all the time or anything to actually do a sighting of the bird, then do the ID that way. But it fascinates me that there's tools available on your phone. You can just go out in a quiet location where there's bird calls and you can get IDs. Your phone can give you IDs from an app. And that kind of got me interested in birds again. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like use, and this is not real, it's about birds. So it's kind of on topic, but not like we're talking about feeding birds in the winter. So on my farm, I have a lot more, I guess, predatory birds, hawks, and a lot of different owls. So it's been really cool for me to figure out what owls I'm hearing at night. And a resource that I have used is like the Kentucky Fish and Wildlife, or I'm sure wherever you're listening at, whatever your state, Fish and Wildlife, they often have profiles of the different birds in your area and like ranges they're in, and we'll also have like sound profiles. So like that's how I was able to figure out that we have both like screech owls and great horned owls that are like nesting around our property because I can hear them, at nighttime and stuff like that. So that's like another way if you start getting interested in what you're seeing or hearing, some of your local fish and wildlife places can help you with that.
Yeah, and it doesn't surprise me that in more rural locations you have this diversity of birds, large and small, raptors and otherwise, and probably lots of field type birds and the smaller finches and things. I guess orioles, robins, all kinds of things. But it seems like in rural areas you get this vast diversity of birds, both in the summer and the winter in Kentucky. That's not to say that you can't have a pretty good diversity of birds in more urban areas, but I just notice the diversity of birds. And it makes sense because, today we're talking about not only feeding birds, that's only like one part of the equation because birds are animals and animals need more than just food. They need cover and water and some other things. But it's so cool when you go out into a natural meadow or here locally where I live in Scott County in the central part of the state. I will go walking in wild areas that have like, undisturbed meadow type openings, sunny meadow openings. And just, I always notice how much noise is made by the birds. And it's so cool because I don't have, quite as many birds here in Georgetown. But in those areas, it is really neat that you get such a diversity here in Kentucky. As I said, both winter and summer.
So I have a kind of a question. So when you think about feeding birds, do you think about like when somebody says, "Do you feed the birds?" Are you thinking immediately like a bird feeder, like a supplemental? You're putting out seed of something that's not in the garden and planted, or are you thinking about? Yeah, so I'm the same way. Like we don't feed the birds here, but I make sure I leave my plantings that I know are particular to birds. Like there's certain like finches that like Rudbeckia and all those kinds of things, and I leave all those up until like March for both cover as well as to let them forage a little bit in there. And that's what I always think of, but I know a lot of people there's just like kind of two ways to think about that. And then there's
I do the same thing at home. Leave some of those plants that I know, like you said, the finches especially, that they like to feed on. But like here at our office, like we have more like the landscape plantings are more of like that traditional low maintenance, evergreen stuff. So they're not really getting anything from them. So like we have bird feeders out that we feed pretty much all year around. And of course it fluctuates because, once summer gets here, there's more food and variety for them to eat. So they're not going through as much. But that's how I've always done it. And I think that's like our plant minds at work thinking, certain plants that can benefit wildlife as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like if you do have a really, high, like at your house or your whatever, if it's mostly, conifers or plants that don't produce some sort of seed, then you might want to supplement if you want to have more bird population. But maybe you don't necessarily need to if you've got like a rain garden planting with a lot of these kinds of things or a lot of native plants. So that's a really good point, Jess.
So do you specifically select things because they provide that? Be honest. I'm just kidding. But
be honest.
Oh.
I'm usually planting for bees, so it kind of goes hand in hand.
Brett didn't even know.
Be yourself, Jessica. Do what you want to do.
Yeah.
Because I think you will see in seed catalogs or in nursery catalogs and on nursery tags, it will say, beneficial to wildlife in X, Y, and that's what it usually means, is either for cover or for food or for those other things. This is literally, what we're talking about. Because the other thing I think about too is the more kind of plant mass and spaces I bring in, the more room I'm bringing in for better for worse, for some people, insects and small rodents and things that owls and hawks, but also other, smaller birds eat insects. And so it's kind of like this little micro ecosystem that's providing sustenance, is another way I think of it. But if you'd asked me when I was growing up, I would have thought of a bird feeder.
Yeah, me too.
And I think most people, that's kind of the vibe, because not everybody wants
there's no wrong answer to it. I was just curious on what.
A bird feeder is a concentrated thing. If you want to, because one of the motivations for feeding birds is not only for the benefit of the birds, but for the benefit of watching the birds. So you can locate those at a certain spot, either far away from a window or close to a window. We'll talk about that as we get into that. But yeah, I love the habitat angle of feeding birds, because if you have a habitat that supports, some of the native plants that are good for wildlife, even non-native plants, or some non-natives that, different ones that could be good. But if you have plants that are good for birds, that means you are thinking about the habitat, and you're thinking about things like shelter and nesting sites. And you mentioned evergreens. If you have evergreens, that's an important shelter location for birds. But I really like that angle, because you're taking the kind of the 1,000-foot approach, as you're probably considering more than just feeding the birds. And that's what this conversation is starting out as. I love that, because you can feed birds and have birds in an area, but I believe from a sustainable standpoint, if you address some of the plants to go along with, bird feeders, it's a better approach. Because those plants are going to be out there when the bird feeder may not be full or be filled, or otherwise not available to birds.
What is the thought process behind, I feel like I've heard, feed the birds in the winter, or don't feed them unless it's a really hard winter, a really long winter, or don't feed them at all. And I feel like that can be a toss up.
It's hard to nail down. I mean, some people say if you start feeding the birds in the winter, it's important to keep feeding the birds in case a habit develops. And there's information. I don't know about you guys, but as I was looking over some of the info is not super conclusive on that, as far as, do birds develop habits? Do they become dependent through those habits on just coming to feeders? Or if you feed birds, does a population grow too much and becomes unsustainable? There's a lot of these issues around feeding birds that, there's many angles you could talk about.
Yeah, there's a lot of mixed, like you said, mixed information about, like, I read somewhere that, like, you can see like an increase, like, increase in population of, survival of chicks, basically, like, versus like if they weren't being fed, maybe they lay like 4 eggs and they're going to be lucky if 2 survive, but they've like noticed like birds that are being fed, have a regular food source, those chicks are, you might have all 4 eggs, survive with it. So, and then vice versa with some of the other, things, Ray, he just mentioned too.
I mean, birds obviously need more energy through the wintertime, and that's a given, especially when there's heavy snowfall. And future podcasts, we'll talk about snowfall from a different angle. But when there's heavy snowfall, there's not as much forage available, especially for those ground feeding birds. And I guess that leads us to another point is, we talked about bird feeders, but they're not all created equally, and they're not all designed equally. Was it you, Jessica, that mentioned finches?
I think, both Alexis and I mentioned them.
Yeah, you guys mentioned finches, and those bird feeders are completely different, because the seed mixes for finches tends to be little, and they are specific for finches in many cases. but not all bird feeders are the same, and not all birds feed up high where you would hang a bird feeder maybe 6-8 foot, to keep it away from raccoons and squirrels and things. Some birds in Kentucky, we have a whole, I don't know, bunches of different birds that feed on the ground. They're ground feeders. So that's an important note. When we're talking about bird feeders, we'll acknowledge the fact that there's a lot of different types of bird feeders, and they each have their own kind of space and their own scenario to use those. And using a variety of different bird feeders when you go to do your own research, that can lead to a greater variety of birds.
And I'm watching as a fluffy creature crosses Ray's camera.
Same.
Which reminds me that we should talk about
those fluffy creatures.
Now. Yeah. This is a neighborhood cat that they're seeing. I'm sorry that our listeners can't see this. We'll add video in the future maybe. But predation is another, we talked about some of the potential downsides of feeding birds, but a big one here where I live is predation from cats. Because if you have a bird feeder, that accumulates the birds in one spot, and it can be a real issue.
So just to kind of close that out with not to say clarity.
I was jumping. Yeah.
No, you're not at all. But I think in case anybody was waiting to hear, it's definitely a terrible idea to have a bird feeder through the winter, or it's definitely a great idea to have a bird feeder through the winter. It seems like we don't really exactly know, which means that it's probably some blend of both.
Research is inconclusive.
Yeah. Inconclusive, yeah.
And one of the things I try to keep in mind with some of the activities that we do, on a scale of us one farm or one house or whatever, it's like we're not going to make or break the world with those types of interactions. And so as long as it's not, you're going to go out and plant some bush honeysuckle or something like that.
Please don't do that.
A lot of activities. I don't know. It's kind of like, you can do it, and you're probably, so it's, I think if you want to have a bird feeder, seems like it's okay to have a bird feeder.
Yeah, sure. And most of the information leans far towards that direction than the other, because especially in northern climates where you do have lots of snowfall and there might not be that native habitat and those native habitat plants around, it is important to provide a food source and energy source for the different birds. It's much more of the information points to that than the contrary. So yeah.
And I feel like if you're on the fence about it, or you're not sure, then just ramp up your, plants that support that population. So those are going to be native species. They support a variety of things.
The habitat,
and I feel like I've seen, and if anybody else has seen this, say something, but this is Alexis's memory and not, I can't pull the research out, but I feel like I've seen where they say like suet or supporting them maybe with like fats rather than just seeds is maybe is supportive and really beneficial if you're worried about
high energy
and like upping the population too much with the seed or having issues with squirrels or something like that.
And I love woodpeckers, and I mean that's one of the things that I know that if I want to attract some of our woodpecker species is put out suet. I just know that that's going to bring those guys in. There's certain types of birds that goes back to suet feeder. Oftentimes comes in blocks. Suet does, which is a high fat product, a blend of animal fats. But it's often in a cage to kind of protect that because everything loves and is attracted to that stuff. But that goes back to the fact that that's a different type of bird feeder, and it attracts a completely different types of birds than maybe the finch feeders would. So that's a good point, Alexis. And that is a high energy food, and some of the larger birds tend to really like that specifically.
And one of the other, besides the cats, as we watch the cat walk by again, is I think a lot of people have issues with squirrels. Like that's like one of the big ones. And I know they make, you see now where they're marketing those squirrel feeders, right? Bird feeders that if a squirrel climbs on them, it kind of like closes it up. So it's like the bird shouldn't be heavy enough, right? Unless it's a really chunky bird for the winter or something, I guess. So like stand on it and like close it. But it should close off every time the squirrel gets on there. But I feel like a lot of people, once they find out, that you have a bird feeder and that seed or whatever is available, they're kind of challenging to keep to keep out.
Squirrels are so they can defeat a lot of different systems. That's why you'll find a lot of the, on online order sources or local departments, or it'll feature prominently like squirrel proof. Bird feeder, usually involves a wire cage. And there's all kinds of other novel mechanisms like the spinning squirrel feeder that you see that, we all watch the funny videos on.
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
Squirrel that just gets on there and flies around, fell straight out.
Till they shoot off.
Yeah,
the raccoons,
there's lots of novel approaches to add to keeping the undesirables out, like squirrels. But a lot of those are just maybe as simple as a very small opening, depending on the type of bird that you're trying to attract, or that cage. Cages are what I see most nowadays, is cages around the opening so that the birds can get to that. Small birds can, but the squirrels can't.
Have you all seen the Mark Rober video of the squirrel? Like, I guess you would call it an obstacle course, sort of, that he creates. It's a squirrel getting to a bird feeder, and it's like multiple panels, and he filmed the whole thing and to see if this squirrel. He's the same guy who
I think I have seen that. Yeah.
The porch pirate glitter bomb boxes, where the person goes to steal an Amazon package and it blows up like it.
Oh my gosh!
Like blows glitter in their face.
He's like a pretty famous YouTuber. He makes like a couple of videos a year with a ton of money going into them, and so he has one that's a pretty good. He has like these really awesome like slow-mo video of like squirrels like jumping dramatically or when they fall. They talks a little bit too about like them using their tails to fall and how they're able to do all that kind of stuff. But anyway,
they're crazy. Like if you go out in the woods and you irritate them and they just like chat at you and they squawk at you and you're like, okay, excuse me, rude. They get pretty upset when they can't get to the bird feed. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, they do not like being excluded.
One of Annie's coworkers was telling me that they have a bird feeder, but their yellow lab just like eats the birdseed just nonstop.
The yellow lab is a ground feeder.
Somebody that Alexis and I both know really well, they had a lab do the same thing and then eventually had to take it to the vet and pay a hefty vet bill because it ate so much birdseed.
Yeah. I love when I remember getting like these random calls. I feel like there wasn't a couple years ago, people were worried about the bird. Maybe it was like a rough winter and people were worried about the birds. So a lot of people had bird feeders out. And the next spring, I got several phone calls that were about, they were like, these random sunflowers have just like popped up in my yard. And I was like, what? And they were like, yeah, it's just like in the middle of the grass. I don't know how it got there. And I was like, did you have a bird feeder out? And they were like, oh my goodness.
Yeah. Have you been listening to a lot of Post Malone lately?
There you go.
It was adorable.
Sunflower reference, Brett. Nice.
Yeah, there was like the birds were just thanking you for feeding them this winter. So black oil sunflower seeds are a great bird seed.
So
very popular.
Ray did some good detective work here. Ray, did you want to talk a little bit about some of these food preferences that you pulled together?
Yeah, I guess we've kind of alluded to it in different points here, but different birds, it's important to note here that different birds have different food preferences. For instance, blue jays, cardinals, lots of birds like the different sunflower seeds. They specifically like the striped sunflower seeds. We mentioned that finches, they really love thistle seed, which are very small and sometimes take a specific cedar. And you can even use peanuts for larger birds like blue jays and woodpeckers. They enjoy that as a food source. The proso millets, that's a lot of different species. And then with suet, we mentioned that the woodpeckers love that along with nuthatches. So I guess as you do your research, just know that not only is there different bird feeders, there's different bird feeders for specific seed types. And there's a lot of different seed types out there. And some of the seeds can be a little bit expensive if you're trying to attract specific bird species. Now you're going to find sunflower seeds and straight runs and a lot of bird feed, and that's a great place to start because a lot of birds love those, like the black oil sunflower seeds, the dark sunflower seeds. They're really easy for small birds to crack open. But yeah, it's interesting how different birds have very specific preferences in some cases. And I was working with a wildlife biologist, and some of the bird feeders that I noticed, they were around the station there, really, really messy. And they were doing some kind of study, and he said there was a preference study. They were using mixes, and what they found out that the birds, and I don't remember which kind of birds, but they were going through and picking out only what they wanted, and they were just tearing up the bird feed. And there was just bird seed. You mentioned, plants coming up around a bird feeder, but there was a radius of 15 feet around this one bird feeder that they had a mix in it that they didn't like, but one of the 5 or 6 seeds that were in there, but they were just scattering most
That's pretty
of the
cool.
seeds everywhere. Yeah, but it was really interesting. But that kind of hit home with me that birds definitely have a preference.
Yeah.
And
they really do.
And there's some things like to stay away from, necessarily, like basically things that would be filler that are not going to be, preferred by birds, are going to be discarded. And so, if you can look at the ingredient list, you can stay away from those and not, waste your money on basically these filler seeds. So you've got like wheat, hulled oats, rice, rye, those types of things are usually discarded. And so you can create a weed problem for yourself if you're not careful. And there's no use, spending money on something
a lot
that's
of those
not
in a really cheap mix are kind of bulking agents. I guess I consider those like the bulking agents. Yeah.
And we've talked a lot about feeders, and I've just remembered like a couple of years ago, we had a class of like making your own kind of bird feeders. So like something like in the winter, if you want to do yourself, or if you have kids, like the classic, taking a pine cone and like rolling it like in peanut butter and, bird seed. Or I've done one before where we've taken mini little plastic bunt pan kind of things, and you just take your regular birdseed mix and you mix it with clear gelatin, and then put it together in the mold. Or you could do it, or you could put it like in cookie cutters that way, and then you let it set up. Obviously put like a hole in it so you can like string it and tie it onto the trees. And you can put those out.
Little birdseed jello.
Yeah, and like they'll hang out there and feed on those, and you can kind of decorate your tree in the winter, and have a food source that way, and something a little fun to do on like the colder wintry days.
Oh my gosh, it's a Christmas tree for the birds.
It is.
Just decorate a
I remember when those
tree.
were really popular, specifically the pine cones and the peanut butter trick. And I believe that was a master gardener program that we did 4 or 5 years ago, and it was so cool, and it worked. I brought one home with me. It was really messy. I had it in a little bag, and I was like, "Oh, is this thing going to work?" And I think they rolled it in peanut butter with birdseed in the peanut butter, and birds came and scarfed it up right outside of the window.
I'll just let you know they are delicious.
Did you enjoy them? Yeah,
a little crunchy. You want to have something to drink, but
Brett also enjoys them. Apparently, folks, he does.
It's similar to like chocolate covered pretzels, peanut butter covered pine cone.
Yeah,
the same vibe.
I do love some peanut
we all
butter.
have traditions, family traditions.
So I know we're talking about feeding the birds, and I feel like this is on point. But who would I be if I didn't bring this up? Of just sort of, as you're thinking about feeding the birds, and we talked about birds that you may want to focus on, like kind of target with your seed and your style of bird feeder. Are there any birds that anyone would say are like extremely, or just like partially beneficial
Obnoxious?
towards like gardening? Well, I'm just thinking
beneficial for
like
gardening.
birds, as we've talked, the birds, mostly the birds we're talking about are going to be, like seed eaters, which is great, but a lot of them are also insect eaters.
Oh yeah.
And so are there ones, if I had a choice, I would definitely want to attract this kind of bird, hoping that it'll stay around and eat up a bunch of my caterpillars in in the summer. I don't know. It's kind of like a general question if anybody has any thoughts. Cause like I know from like a predatory bird standpoint, but I'm like thinking about smaller birds eating insects, like.
Yeah, there's a lot of birds that I see.
House
I don't know if
finches
it's
and
their
stuff like that.
preference, but yeah, there's birds that eat. I mean, lots of different birds eat insects depending on food availability. And fruit, for that matter.
What's the ones that everybody puts all the houses up for to help with mosquito control?
Martins. The martins.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Martins,
Yeah, I forgot about those.
Yeah.
Yeah, martins. Yeah. Martins are good ones. I was reading some information about it. There actually was a UK entomology student who did her research on how birds, like can birds be incorporated into a integrated pest management program, and I thought that was really fascinating. And so there's a bunch of studies that have been done, a lot of them in like cherry and grape, like vineyards and orchards, more out in like California, sort of West Coast stuff, because birds are a problem in fruit, and obviously there's a lot of insects, but they actually looked at a lot of things from a predatory bird standpoint, which I think I brought up before, but just like because I like to talk about falcons in general, putting up like places for falcons to roost, or areas where like kestrels might want to be, can be great for keeping those birds that might eat your crops out, because they're intimidated by these predatory birds. So just putting up these perches, they found, was really, really helpful in like vineyards and in cherry orchards, which I thought was really cool. And then like it basically just said like kind of research was still out on whether or not birds are great for IPM. To me it sounded like for fruit it was kind of it might be one or the other as far as birds that attacked insects. But for veggies, where veggies aren't necessarily as big of a bird attractant, not the same way that a fruit might be. And for low, they even said like strawberries, I guess because they're low to the ground versus like a tree fruit, that, birds like not blue jays, like bluebirds and like house finches and, a bunch of those kind of smaller ones were actually really helpful because they ate up. There was one where they were saying like the kale, but cabbage loopers, they ate like 80% of the cabbage loopers on this kale crop. And I was, by just having birds and attracting birds with, nesting areas and stuff like that. So just something to think about if you're really trying to diversify your little ecosystem, that birds might be an option if you're not growing super sweet things, that is.
Yeah, some of the birds I was thinking, I've seen robins when we used to grow some strawberries actually peck on things. I mean, some of the ground feeding birds that if you have strawberries growing on bare ground specifically, they would get in there and they would peck on the fruit.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah, they'll kind of get in there and do some damage.
I'm just wondering, like from like a veggie standpoint, you don't have birds necessarily pecking leaves and cabbage and things like that. Zucchini, there might be benefits to having like bringing in birds if you're growing more of like I said, a low sugar, or if you're growing cut flowers, having them come in for insect for the cucumber beetles and stuff like that.
From a food safety standpoint, it's a little bit problematic.
That's true.
Like
yeah,
the birds, and I didn't think about that until you mentioned that.
That's true.
We talk about power lines that, electrical transmission lines that run overhead, and birds sitting there. And the problem is the birds pooping on everything.
Right.
So I wonder. I never thought about it from that angle, from that perspective. Lots of these fruit and veggie fields are, they are in more rural areas, and more rural areas may have more birds. And producers always worry about, because if a bird flies over and defecates on a head of cabbage, you have to not harvest that head of cabbage or whatever once it's contaminated with feces. So I could see where there's a lot of
good point.
Different considerations. Yeah, on that end. So we're diversifying our food sources. Not only that, but we're diversifying the bird feeders. There's little bird feeders that looks like houses that are decorative. There's bird feeders with cages that help against, keep squirrels and raccoons out. And there's the tube top finch feeders, which I think it's so cool. The tube finch feeders, I think it's only the finches that hang upside down and they get in. I've noticed, I thought it was so weird the first time I saw a tube feeder that had the little...
The perch was above the opening.
Yeah, the perch was above, and it was and they said, "Oh yeah, they have that ability to feed upside down. You'll see them." And I started noticing that. It's so cool. But there's a lot of different types of feeders. So if you address those things, and you have what else? We haven't talked about water yet, have we?
Oh yeah,
a water
source.
About I don't know. I think about it as like when you're doing your pollinator gardens, right? We think about all the extra things that we need to put out for our butterflies
Like
and stuff. The
butterflies is what I was thinking about,
thing, like with the birds. It's like helpful to have a water source, especially there in the winter. Maybe if we've had quite a few days where it's been really cold, and frozen. Just to have
the
a
frozen's
little
a problem,
like not to, a cat water dish, something small like that, not to lure in the cats, but nothing too big.
Just something shallow, it seems
Shallow
like,
where they'll be able to find it.
and I see a lot of the bird baths on online order sources now, they really prominently specify, hey, this is a heated, bird bath, where it won't freeze over, because that freezing is an issue, of course, in the winter when a lot of bird feeding is going on. But like you said, I see a lot of folks here in our neighborhood, and they watch birds because we live along a pretty good sized creek here with a tree line along both sides of it. But I see people setting out like on their back deck patios. They'll set out a shallow dish because they don't have any kind of heated bird water or anything. And, I talked to our neighbors, and that was for feeding the birds. They put it out next to their bird feeder just to have a water source in the wintertime when everything's frozen. So, we've talked about the food. That's the water. Talked about habitat. We haven't talked about placement of bird feeders, because a big problem with feeding birds to me is window collisions. And it seems like there's two strategies that you can to use to sort of mitigate that, control that a little bit. And you can either put the bird feeder, close to the window. The information, if you look over that and do research online, it'll say either within 3 feet of the window, so that that helps with collisions, because they'll shoot for the bird feeder, and they're slowing down naturally any which way to get to the bird feeder. Put the bird feeder close to the window or far away from the window, but not like in that 10 to 3 foot range, because if you get in that range and put a bird feeder near a window. And that was a problem for us at first, because we have a large back patio sliding glass door, and we had probably a feeder on the end of the deck, and it was 8 to 9 feet to the corner of the deck. And we were having a lot of bird collisions with the window. And of course, Reed thought that when our son was younger, he thought that was the coolest thing ever. He's like, birds are saying hi. And I'm like, oh gosh, we have got to address this before a bird gets hurt.
Let's hope they're not still out there.
I made that mistake and started reading, and it said you either do within 3 feet close to the window. And so we moved it to the side within probably a foot of a window, so our son could, go up to the window and watch the birds. But that in between area is problematic for window collisions. You'll have more problems.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane how many birds die from window collisions. So on another nature animal podcast that I listen to, I want to say maybe Columbus or Cleveland, somewhere a bigger city in Ohio, a bunch of migratory birds fly through there every year, and thousands of them were dying from collisions into buildings. And so they've actually passed.
Surfaces are a big problem. Reflective surfaces, like on a lot of skyscrapers. Yeah.
So they passed a thing in the at night during that time, all those buildings leave their lights on for a set week or two time, when the mass amounts of them are migrating through. And they've seen a great reduction in the number of bird collisions, because where they're doing that at nighttime and other things that they're putting on windows and stuff, just so, because I think it's something you don't think about until it actually happens, right? Until you have a bird flying through your window, because we have it happen, unfortunately, all the time at my office, where we just hear it and everyone's like, oh, there's another bird. So we need to probably adjust our bird feeders.
We didn't have trouble at home until, and I read while this was, we did not have trouble with our patio door until I'd opened the curtains. And that's when they would fly into it. So window treatments apparently help a great deal, like blinds, because that looks like a barrier. And if the window's not at an angle where it's reflective, which also confuses birds, but if you have blinds or some kind of window treatment, that also helps a great deal. It's windows that are open, that looks like an opening, that is a problem.
I don't know why birds hit our back window. It's not super often, but a couple times a year, because we don't feed the birds, and it's blocked by a tree, but they still manage to just smack into it, and the whole the dogs lose their minds about it. But I'm like, and it's kind of scary because if I'm like sitting in another room and then I just hear this big like bang in the back of the house, I'm like, oh God, this is how I die. I'm dying. Somebody's coming in. Somebody's breaking in. This is how I die.
This is the end. This is the end.
This is the end. And it's a bird. And like they always get up and fly away. So it's like, was it a bird? I always have to wonder. I'm like, was it a bird?
Unless you look for the feathers, but don't go outside because you never know.
Sometimes you see like their print like on the window afterwards.
Yeah, the silhouette.
Like,
yeah.
It's terrible. Like,
oh, Betty, you hit that hard.
Yeah.
That is it
feels very Looney Tunes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Rhodey Roadrunner, yeah. Kind of smashed up against the window. What else with bird feeders? We were talking a little bit earlier about, it's recommended for bird feeders because they collect bacteria. If the seed source gets wet, especially, it can set up a lot of mold and bacteria, which is very, very bad for the birds. Clean those once a month, keep bird feeders clean. That's an important thing. I should not tell this on my wife, but I remember there was a bird feeding station that you could turn a little dial and it would dispense a seed in your hand and you could take it and feed the birds by this lake. Well, there was a lot of mold and it ended up being maggots in there. Well, she put that in her hand, a wet, and it looked like a lot of oats, but in her hand, and here she goes carrying that. And then I grabbed her hand. I was like, what is that? And she was not paying attention. She looked down and chaos ensued. And people thought some of those were, she did not have a good reaction to that. But that was not a good scenario for a bird feeder. It had a lot of wet feed in there. So keep your bird feeders clean also, because that can cause a lot of issues. And some birds, I believe it's finches, that have a really strong preference that if there's a mold present or wet food, they will not go to that feeder at all. So certain birds won't approach a feeder with moldy food in it, and they learn to avoid
Good
that.
For them. Okay, let's
very
not all
discerning
get like
palates.
What was it? What's it called? Like, and the wheat, is it ergot?
Yeah, ergot or rye, whatever. Yeah.
If your birds start losing their minds, maybe they've been they have a fungus poisoning them.
Do you all remember a couple years ago when they were you were supposed to not have bird baths and not supposed to have
no bird feeders,
because there was some disease going around.
Yeah.
Right.
I feel like we never got good information on that. Like as far as like, why can we do it now? Was it a fluke? Did they figure out what caused it? I'm not.
Everything went back to normal, right?
But it does recirculate certain times of year. Probably like coming up, I would start getting calls because someone would like dig it up from the archives and share it across social media, and you're like, this article is from 2018, and
the last one was in 2021 when there was lots of communicable diseases going around.
Okay.
So it's they still seemingly don't know what it is. Affected birds develop crusting around the eyes and neurologic signs such as tremors and paralysis.
So in that case, I guess they would not want birds to accumulate in a single area.
Right. Just trying to slow down the spread.
Gotcha. And
the birds refuse to stay 6 feet apart and wear masks.
No, they refuse to. It's
so dramatic.
People, I don't know.
Those of you guys that are for +1 for habitat modification, because that's your social distancing for birds. Maybe that if they're going to all the different coneflowers or seed sources, they can space themselves out a little bit. It was also funny that, the folks from North Carolina is looking at a piece of their information. And one of their disclaimers towards the end of the information kind of made me smile a little bit. It says, if you notice heavy bear activity around your bird feeders, cease feeding immediately.
Please.
I'm not going to go out and refill
heavy
the
bear
feeder.
activity.
Heavy bear activity. Oh, it didn't mention squirrels. It mentioned bears. But bears they are attracted to sometimes those seed sources like sunflower seeds and stuff specifically, or suet. Suet will really
I imagine
bring in some animals. But if you notice bears eating out of your bird feeders, you might not want to approach for a refill.
Maybe don't refill it.
I'm just
let it run out. Give it a few days.
Or hang it higher in a tree or something.
Put up a sign that says
no bears.
Yeah. We talked about cats, and if you have a problem with neighborhood cats, which we do here, we don't have a bird feeder out now because we had a a pack of cats, a large grouping of cats that were running around the neighborhood visiting all the bird feeders, and it was kind of sad. The cat pack. We just saw groupings of feathers in the backyard.
Oh, yeah.
Where they were taking down the songbird, so we took down our bird feeder. For that reason, we currently don't have it up because, as you guys mentioned earlier, I had one of the neighborhood cats in the basement wandered in and was making a racket, and she's one of the perpetrators. And Reed calls it the cat with the murder mittens because she's a very efficient hunter. So Reed's murder like, "Oh, that's the cat. That's the murder mitten cat." And I'm like, "Murder mittens?" He says, "Yeah, her claws. She catches lots of birds." I'm like, "Oh gosh." So yeah,
I'm always worried about birds at our house catching the corgis because I've said this before, but we've got a pack of black vultures that roost in an old tobacco strip and shed, and they're little fluffy babies, and then when they're like old enough to fly, and they just like creep around, and they're like very, very close. I'm like, okay, guys, I'm starting to get a little uncomfortable. And the corgis are like, what is this thing? I'm gonna freak
bigger
out.
Than I am.
Well, everyone already knows this on here, but we've had some incidents with hawks taking out chickens at my house. And so my oldest son, who is 4, is convinced like the hawk is the apex predator, not the coyotes that we see, the foxes, like the hawk, because he was taking out about the cows. Like he's very concerned about baby calves, which they're born like close to 100 pounds, some of them, like that they're going to be taken out by hawks. So, the red-tailed hawk is the apex predator on our property.
The top of the food chain.
Not to get too political, but to close out here, do you all have a favorite bird? Or
I like a robin. I'm kind of basic. I like a robin. They're pretty versatile.
I just blanked. No, there's oh crap. Somebody else go. I'm just lost it.
I don't really know what my favorite bird is. I told Alexis I enjoy those red-winged blackbirds.
Yes,
like in the summer, looking. And I think it's just because it's like, oh, it's summer, right? And I see them flying around our hayfields,
edges of meadows and hayfields.
Yeah, them and like the barn swallows, because they're like kind of kamikaze birds, right? Because if you're like, if you're like out on a tractor in a field and they just like dive right in front of you the entire time, getting all the insects and stuff. But those red-winged blackbirds are pretty cool. Yeah, they sound kind of cool too, and
they're harbingers of summer. Yeah,
yeah.
We have I think mine might be the bobwhite quail because we have like a little pack of them around the farm.
Cute.
And I've seen them and they're really cute. But I just love like I'll be in the field and all of a sudden you hear Bob White and I'm like, oh hi.
Hello.
So do you whistle back to them?
Yeah, I do. I whistle back at them and they're probably like, God, who is this perpetrator? But they're fun.
It's a weird accent.
Yeah. Birds in general, I think, can be really fun, but those ones just like always make me smile. So,
Brett, we know you have a favorite.
I've heard 2 different, and I'm sure there's more than that, like folkloric traditions that about a robin, and the same thing about a cardinal, that when you see those, they are a deceased loved one
at a window
visiting you and thinking of you, and which is kind of cool. I've been really feeling grackles the last number of years.
Yeah,
they're like they feel like the black cat, like the yellow-eyed black cat of birds, and they do not give a hoot.
Any cares at all.
They really don't, do they? They're just like
they
prance around, you know.
Yeah,
the name Crackle is perfect for them. It's perfect.
Yeah. It is. They are not in the crow family. They're actually in the blackbird family, but they look like a little mini crow. I like crows a lot. They've gotten a lot. I feel like they've kind of become really popular in the last number of years. Shout out to our friend Neil Wilson, who has been a corvid head way before anybody else was talking about him. But we have a lot of crows and grackles in our backyard. And speaking of birds that eat a lot of insects, that's one of the reasons that I'm down with the grackle. But Yeah, they're fun, and they make just unhinged sounds, which is fun.
They're rackety.
Yeah. They let out a grackle, if you will.
Yeah, they're rackety.
Well,
birds.
cool. Well, something
ones.
A little bit different on the pod for our plant people, but remembering birds can play a vital role in our ecosystems and in our gardens, and even just for our mental health in the winter. It's nice to those little bird cameras. I have some friends with the little bird feeders that have cameras on them that take pictures when the bird comes up to eat, and the amount of joy that brings some people is a beautiful thing.
I would love to have that set up.
Yeah. Well, Christmas is coming. Christmas is past when this episode comes out.
We'll have to have a cat cage around our bird feeder.
But hopefully you get one for Christmas then, right?
I hope Jennifer's listening.
Yeah, Jennifer. Pay attention.
Shout
out. We hope you enjoyed it, and that you can follow us on Instagram at horticulturepod. You can shoot us an email, which will be in the show notes. If you've got any questions or thoughts, while we're not bird experts, we can certainly, if you have a very specific bird question, we can certainly ask our resident bird experts, which, yes, we do have some in the forestry department here at UK. So grateful for them. But if you have any about that, you want to hear maybe about different birds, or, I don't know, we'll do our best. Maybe we should have a bird expert on here. Maybe we need to call Lori or Jeff and see what's going on over there. But follow us. Thank you all for being here, our little true leaves, and we appreciate it. We hope you have a great time and that you join us next time, because we're talking about snow, which, yes, can be fun. So anyways, have a great one, y'all.